Jason, before I introduce today's show, I would like to officially announce my candidacy for Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. Can I count on your vote?
You have my vote, sir. And if I can vote multiple times, I'll do that as well, because they know that's what we do, right? Is vote illegally and steal elections. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm 100% on board. I don't know what it entails. I mean, so
no one
but
does.
I assume. But I don't think many of the people that are actually in Congress know what it entails. So I'm on board 100%. So yes,
I appreciate.
What do I need to do? Do I need to sign a petition or go down to my local?
You just need to be. You need to be at the roll call. We need 218 plus one to formally install me as speaker. Okay. All right. Enough of the political bullshit. Sorry.
Yeah. There'll be enough of it on today's podcast on Why Does It Wilhelm Scream?
Yes, there will. Speaking of welcome back, Screamers, and Happy New Year to all of you.
I hope your holiday season was a nice one.
And if you've made any resolutions for this new year, I hope that you have broken them already.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, because I mean, what's the point? I think the message of Why Does Wilhelm Scream really is you're perfect just the way you are. You know what? And live each day. Don't worry about some sort of far flung. I'm going to start. January 1st is just just another day. It is not really. It's not significant. Insignificant in any way other than just the passage of time. It doesn't mean that we did anything special. Just be your best self. Be kind to people. Try not to take other people's things, and really, and watch a few movies. I think that's the big message that we have for this podcast.
Engage with your imagination
and vote locally.
And vote locally. Local elections do matter. If the past however many years, I don't know, 200 plus years, if they've taught us anything, right, it's that local elections matter.
And they have not taught us really anything.
No. By the absurdity happening in the House of Representatives. Today's show, we're mainly going to be talking about Terry Gilliam's Brazil and the other two films in the trilogy of imagination, Time Bandits and The Adventures of Baron Muchausen. And a little bit, I think, about Gilliam himself, right? We'll also give you some films you might like if you like Brazil. And we're going to talk briefly about the film Soft and Quiet, directed by Beth de Araujo. Before that, I think, Jason, you want to sort of eulogize Pele by talking about the film Victory.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that if you're in the consciousness that you saw that soccer legend, superhero, the person who kind of brought it into certainly my consciousness, if not in most Americans' consciousness, was Pele, the singular named Brazilian soccer player, has passed away recently after the World Cup was over. I don't think he waited to see Messi win and then passed away. I think it was just complications from being old. And that happens to all of us. We're all marching towards the sweet, sweet relief of death. And may it come soon for all of us. But on the other podcast of why Jason wishes for death sometimes. So I thought what would be a fun exercise would be to revisit Pele's film career. Now, for the most part, Pele starred in films where he was Pele. I mean, he's in a bunch of different films, but most of them are either about documentaries about his life or where he pops up as a cameo as Pele. Now, he did two films, and I think he's done more than this, but I think he did two films early on, right after his retirement. He would have been in his early 40s, where he kind of went off into film. He did this movie called A Marcha or A Marcha. I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. It is completely lost to time. I cannot find any reference to it. I mean, I can find references to it on IMDb and things like that, but I can't find the actual film. And then he made a mainstay cable staple of my childhood, a movie called Victory or Escape to Victory, depending on where you're coming from. It was known as Victory in the United States. It was a film starring Michael Caine and Sylvester Stallone. And it was essentially The Great Escape meets The Longest Yard. A bunch of misfits that were in a POW camp in World War II, Nazi Germany, are playing soccer. Max van Sydow sees sees them, he's a Nazi. That guy played more Nazis than he didn't play Nazis, right? I mean, that's
right. Which is always a shame. I always felt like he gets I don't know, lumped in or not really typecast. It's either he's in a Bergman film or he's a Nazi, and that's kind of it.
He's such a lanky kind of just striking figure that he does feel like he's the perfect Nazi, and he also has that kind of demeanor that is perfect for a film Nazi. I'm certainly not saying that Max von Sydow is a Nazi himself. He is a soccer player, and he sees Michael Caine leading a group of POWs on the pitch playing soccer, and gets this idea of a game between the German national team and an Allied forces team to be set in France. All the while, you've got Sylvester Stallone, who is an American who doesn't know how to play soccer, but I couldn't really figure out what his role was outside of he was just trying to escape from the POW camp and get information basically back and forth and try to figure out how to get out and continue the war. And then, of course, so one of the players is, in order to make this movie even look halfway like it was real soccer, they brought in actual soccer players from around the world. Because, of course, 47-year-old, I think at the time, Michael Caine, who has never looked like he could play soccer in his life. He is an attractive man, but he's not by Hollywood standard. I mean, I know we go back to this of conventionally attractive people, but he was your typical 60s, 70s, a little bit of pudge. He did not, he's not exactly the most ripped person in on the face of the earth. He certainly doesn't look like he runs on a soccer field for 90 minutes at a time, although all the other people did. I mean, so they got actual professional soccer players to come on and to be the other roles that didn't have really much acting to do other than just to play soccer. So a soccer game is put on between the German national team. All of it is a big ruse for the Allied forces to find a way to, the game is going to be held in Paris. So they're going to try to find a way to escape in Paris. And of course, they're supposed to escape at halftime. And the players decide, you know what? It's okay that we're POWs. I don't mind continuing to be a POW. I just want to kick some German soccer ass.
Some Nazi soccer ass.
Right, because they definitely have the insignia on their jerseys as they're playing. So what did you think? I'm gonna toss it back to you.
Yeah,
have you seen it before? Like this was on all the time when I was a kid. Like this was like a thing that you turned on TBS, you turned on TNT. This was a movie that just kind of permeated my childhood. It was one that I've seen probably, and it's so innocuous, right? And so I apologize. I said I'm going to throw it over to you, but just a little bit of history on it. It's directed by John Huston, Maltese Falcon, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, John Huston, who took this movie as a paycheck. He does not like this movie. And he kind of despised everything about it. He just did it for the money. Michael Caine knew it was cliche, did it so he could work with Pele. Stallone did it for the paycheck. No one in this movie, aside from the soccer players that were playing soccer, really wanted to be in this film. It wasn't anything that was a passion project for any of them. It's based on somewhat true events, but in reality, it was, so it wasn't like something that this was Stallone's dream to bring to film. It was just everyone here showed up to do a job, and that was basically it. So again, okay, now I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, but that's about what I thought of it. I had seen it before. It had been a long time, and it's not a film that I think about much or think about revisiting. I think it's very cliched, very tropey. One of the things that I find interesting, I think it's a very American sports film. So,
yes. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like, even though I like The Natural has the same
underdog, kind of, right?
They're going to triumph at the end.
It's Bad News Bears, right?
It's Mighty Ducks. It's all of those films. And what I think is really interesting though about that is it's a very American film with a very non-American sport at its center. But again, I watched it kind of, right. Because I know, the beats, what's going to happen, these characters, and okay, Pele's going to come back on after being injured, and he's going to score an important goal. He's going to score the tying goal, which should have been the winning goal.
Right.
But again,
the movie's theme is a huge misnomer.
It's
spoiler alert. Right. They don't actually win.
But again, but a draw in this. But this is, so sure. I think I don't know how much of a soccer fan you are. I'm a big soccer fan. And there are times where a draw you might as well take as a victory against certain teams. And so, everyone watching the game there is French, German, European. So they understand how these things work because, under like actual sort of socialist governments, right? You share sometimes.
Sure, right.
That's what the draw is, right? They're sharing the points because they're playing essentially the German national team. And at this time, the time it was set, the national teams would have been really kind of strong and important and powerful, much more than they are, I think, even now. I think now we're much more interested in club football than international. But I mean, the movie, I think Kane is having a good time. I think Von Sydow is doing his best to have a good time, but sometimes he sort of looks like he's wondering what he's doing in this movie. Like, why am I here? Like, what is the point of me in this film, really?
Right. I brought this Nazi uniform from another movie I did, 6 months ago.
Stallone.
That's why I'm in it, because I had the uniform. I already had a costume.
They were like, "Hey, do you still have that? Yeah, just come on set." Stallone is doing his very most kind of like winky, jokey American Stallone. I think he's very much an American archetype in this film. I mean,
it's not a good movie. It's not. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's not a good movie.
No,
you're not going to hurt my feelings by saying it was. And Pele's not given nearly enough to do. Now, granted,
I think he says like 5 words altogether.
Right. He bicycle kicks 3 times. One's a repeat of the exact same scene. He does have a funny moment. When they're planning out their plays, and Pele takes the chalk from Michael Caine and is like, "No, I'm going to do." He zigzags all over the field, and then he kicks the ball. He's going to kick the ball in. It's easy.
Easy. Just give me the ball, and I'll do this.
And so audiences watching know that it's Pele, obviously know that that's what he could do. And so that's a funny moment. When I watched this as a kid, and again, with, I was not looking at it with critical eyes. This was, again, just something that was I think I liked it a lot more then, because it is kind of feel goody. And by the time it's overly long, but like you said, all the beats, the training montages, and in a normal film like this, you would have multiple games, right? You'd have them get humiliated in the first game. You'd have them come to do a tie, take like Necessary Roughness, right? Where they lose the entire season. The next to the last game, they tie it. So they get some confidence, and then they take on Texas State, and they win. They beat them with no stakes to the game, but they still beat them and show up the big bad team, right? This, you don't have that. So you've stretched this movie out. There's a really long section in it. What I found surprising about this was, looking at it now, is how low stakes the entire movie is. The Nazis are not that bad. I mean, you're not even given a real, and I know that that's not what the intent of this movie was, right? This is not to make you feel shitty, but ultimately, are you concerned about making Nazis feel shitty? You need a bad guy who's really a bad guy. And outside from them wearing the swastikas, and who they are, they're not presented as monsters. Sydow is presented as a pretty level-headed and fair-thinking Nazi in regards to, and again, we don't get into Nazis at all, right? I mean, you don't really see any of the war and the horrors of the POW camp, which would have made the sacrifice that the players make to give something back to the community, to give something back to the Allied fans that are watching this, to think that, hey, maybe we can win this war, maybe we can give some sort of, do what the Nazis are hoping to do, which is to crush the spirit of the ally, of this nation that they're playing in. There's none of that whatsoever. None of that's there. There's a big, long, protracted sequence where Stallone escapes from the POW camp and is in France, and he has this bizarre love interest that comes out of nowhere, that has no sort of chemistry whatsoever, and then pops back up at the end of the movie where they hug after the game is over, and you're like, wait, are they dating? Because she was very standoffish, because she didn't really want to know him, because she figured he would die. And so that subplot was really bizarre. And then by the time you get to the game, I think there's a reason that there's not that many soccer movies or football movies, in the sense that it's hard to, one, portray that well and then to portray it as a tense game, right? Because soccer in itself, yes, there are moments of excitement, but it's different than baseball. It's different than football, where you can stop everything down and then do basketball as well, where you can stop everything down and then do a play, take a play, show a pitch, show a long throw, and show how much time is left on the clock. Soccer just doesn't lend itself towards that. And so There's no urgency in the game at all. And you also have then taken all of these soccer players who don't act in the film, right? They just play soccer. They don't really say anything. And then you make them the driving force of the movie at the end to say, no, we really want to go back out and fight these German guys, which, okay, like they weren't really let in on the whole, because Stallone escapes and then they bring him, and then he gets captured again so he can go back in to play the game. But none of the teams, because Stallone's been kept in solitary, none of the team knows what they're actually, what the plan is for their escape. So it's a really bizarre way to handle that emotional thread of like, okay, we've broken through the bottom of the stadium we've tunneled through the stadium to get you guys out. And Kane's like, no, we all got to go. And then essentially like one of the guys like, well, we want to still play. And Kane's like, wait a minute, you want to play? Who wants to play the game?
You want to play? You want to play?
It's so weird how that plays out. And then of course they go out and they tie the game, and then they're still able to escape because the crowd rushes the field, rushes the pitch, and starts putting coats on the players and blends in. And then Sidow is there with a shit-eating grin on his face,
watching it happen,
watching it all happen, knowing that, like, and again, this would have had, like, if you wanted to show stakes here, and of course I understand you're not going to bring, if you had Hitler at the stadium and there would have been stakes to the Nazi soldiers and the Nazi officers for losing this game or tying this game as well, but none of that is there. So it's just a really weird, like, it really is like a kid's movie just set in World War II, like with really kind of oddly inappropriate setting.
Yeah. This made me think about Hogan's Heroes. That's kind of that's the vibe I got, right?
Right,
it was
It's
like
very
an
much
episode of Hogan's Heroes. I mean, escaping is kind of like a business. I mean, they have these commanding officers within the camp that arrange for, like, well, we like your plan, so we'll kind of endorse your plan to escape, or we don't like your plan, so we won't endorse your plan to escape. I'm watching the at the end of the movie when the crowd rushes the field. I'm like, okay, those German soldiers are dead. Right.
Yeah.
The crowd would have killed those soldiers. And also, von Sydow is watching this game and applauding like the effort, because he comes off as a sportsman. He comes off as someone who's really interested in the spirit of competition. He's like, I want a fair game. I want a real game. He gets upset when one of his colleagues, lets him know that the ref is there to kind of fix the game and make sure that they don't lose. I mean, he's upset about that. But here's the thing. At the end of this movie, von Sydow catches a bullet in the face.
Right. And most likely the German national team does as well.
Yep.
Like, there are stakes here that are just glossed over in a Karate Kid type ending, because the whole thing is, Stallone is this American who's playing goalie against a German national team, and he's not a soccer player.
He's not an athlete.
There's a penalty kick, and he's able to stop it. And so that's basically the end. The game ends in a tie. But yes, and that's what I don't really understand about this movie is, who was it made for? Like, what was the audience here?
And in 1981.
Right. Like, there were plenty of gritty, like The Longest Yard would have already been out. This would have been, so you would have already had movies like this. And that's what's great about movies like these, is that yes, they're repetitive. Yes, they're cliche, but the formula is there. And if you stick to the formula, typically your movie is going to work. That's why they've made so many Rocky films, and most of them are halfway watchable movies, because they stick to the formula. It pulls at all the things that it pulls at you. All your emotions are played. And this movie just has, like I said, it just stays so low stakes the entire time. Yeah. And Kane and Stallone are watchable. Pele, again, is not given much to do. So that's disappointing especially because he's on the poster and he's clearly there to sell the movie. But this is one of those movies that the poster is definitely better than the movie.
Yeah.
And that's basically what you have. And I think it's one of those ones it's so, like, it has a really good pedigree. So and I think we get lulled to sleep by that sometimes, is that this movie should be better than it is. So I'm just going to, like, put it on in the background, but it is just, one of the things that stuck out to me watching it now and that I had in my head, we talked last time about I think about you when I go to the bathroom line, which I had mistakenly thought it was I think about you when I go to pee. When the arm breaking scene, so in the movie, they have to break the arm of the existing goalkeeper so Stallone can play goal because he's the only one who knows the plan to escape. The arm breaking scene in the movie in my head was much more violent and like you heard this snap and it was and you actually saw Kane's boot, but it was I was like, oh, well, that wasn't anything at all. But in my head when I was a kid, I was like, oh, that was rough. Like that was a thing that was I had to turn away from.
Yeah, just I think one last thought going back to something you said about the players is that we never form any kind of attachment to the player. So there is no sort of emotional stakes. I mean, and I think even Sir Bobby Moore is one of the players as an actor. And which is funny, he played for West Ham United, which is where Michael Caine's character comes from. So there's that kind of, and they played the same position. He's actually decent in the film. He's kind of like the big sandy-haired guy.
Yes.
So he's actually, I mean, we could have had more attachment to him. We could have seen some of these players, something could have happened to one of them. I mean, more than just having their arm broken by like your commanding officer, but nothing happened. I mean, even like the attempt with Pele, it didn't. I mean, we're just like, we know what's gonna
right. If you had of 86, the entire subplot of Stallone escaping, which was really the only, again, only there to add an ill-advised love interest and to give you the comedic paper mache head sequence, which was overdrawn and kind of funny when you first saw it, but really, and like you said, had you have developed just a passing relationship with these guys where they all had some sort of like wide swath personality trait that, there's a fat guy and there's a smart aleck and there's a guy who doesn't speak any English and there's the guy who punches everybody, all that, all of those tropes, right? You could have done that and made this really, I mean, like this has potential and it didn't, because again, it's just a sports movie and all of them have potential just because of just the nature of us liking those types of things. I mean, and I say us just, as a collective humanity, and it really did nothing with them. But it's it's watchable. Again, it's like I said, it's background noise. If you needed to turn something on for your cats to watch while you're out of the house or something, this would be perfect.
They'd be like, that Pele, he can move.
Right. That was one of the things too, is like the bicycle kick that Pele uses to tie up the game. When they show it the first time, it goes in the top right-hand corner. And when they show it again, it goes underneath the goalie. I love shit like that.
Those kind of mistakes, those kind of anachronisms that you catch in a film, and you're like, how did that's wrong, isn't it?
Right.
That's not right. That's
it's like when they
from the other angle.
It's like when they break the glass in The Usual Suspects. When he drops the coffee cup, it like breaks, and like every single time they filmed it, it broke in a different way. Yeah. And that's less noticeable than this, though. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, victory.
Yeah, that was victory, and thank you for making me watch that again.
And now you'll never have to watch it again.
I'm not going to.
Right.
I'm sorry, Pele. So speaking of Nazis, this is a good segue into
that was not intentional, but yeah.
Into the film Soft and Quiet. This film is a trip. This film is an absolute trip. It plays out in real time over sort of one afternoon and into the evening. And it was shot all the way through like on 4 consecutive days. So they'd start at like 4:30 in the afternoon and they just run it all the way through. And they did that 4 times so that the effect is that they get edited together so that the effect looks like one continuous take. So the story is that an elementary school teacher named Emily organizes a mixer of like-minded women. Excuse me. They meet in the rec room of a church. And at first it seems like kind of a regular like white lady wine club until our main POV character starts to serve her cherry pie. And we see a swastika carved into the crust. I'm going to pause for a second.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't know. I sort of avoided all of the like stuff about this film. So I just knew that like something happened. And, you know,
Same here. When I suggested that we watched it, I had just seen like, oh, controversial and shocking and you won't believe this. And I was like, all right, you piqued my interest.
Yeah. I had heard kind of the same thing and I had heard like good things, but I was like, okay, this sounds interesting. And I didn't read anything else about it. When that when she took the foil off of that pie crust, I out loud went, "Oh, fuck."
The film lulls you to sleep, right? Because that's 15 minutes in, and it's an hour and 30-minute movie. And you start off with you see her, and she's taking a pregnancy test, and very like hurriedly taking a pregnancy test, and she's crying at the results of it. You don't see the results of it. And then she engages with one of her students. She's a teacher, and she engages with one of her students that is left after school. It's apparent that his mom is late and hasn't picked him up, so he's sitting on the curb. And she engages with him to basically tell him to go tell a janitor to not mop while he's there because he could fall and get hurt. And all of this to this point seems... It doesn't necessarily seem normal, but it doesn't also seem so out of bounds that you're like questioning any of it.
Right.
She explains why she explains why she makes the boy go confront the janitor. This is a female janitor, person of color, but you don't really think anything of that. And when his mom gets there, she explains to him that, well, he's always the first to help out people in class, and he's not really assertive about himself. So she's trying to help him gain confidence and be more assertive and just stand up for himself. And then that's basically it. Then you're walking directly to the church where she's meeting up with these women at the white or the Aryan female. I forget what the name of it was now.
I do too. But yeah, so it turns out that they're all there. They're all there. I mean, it turns out that it's mainly talking about those people and how white people are being victimized and it's not fair and blah, blah, blah. And all this kind of the same basic white supremacist right-wing bullshit rhetoric, right? So it's like this just women's white Aryan club.
Yeah, they use the word Aryan and like, women's Aryan gathering or meeting or something like that. It wasn't an acronym or anything like that. It was just written on a small whiteboard. As you pull back from them, because even when they show the swastika, you're like they're joking about it, and the comment is made, "Well, we can't joke about anything anymore." So you're, right. and then you see the whiteboard that says the Aryan meeting, and then you're like, okay, it's balls to the wall, QAnon and also just Stormfront and Proud Boys and all of none of those things are brought up specifically. Stormfront is, but not the other two. Right. And then they essentially go around the table.
It's like an airing of grievances. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. And so like
having a Festivus celebration,
right. Which is ironic. Yeah. Anyway, so the racist club comes to a close when the priest or whoever
knows no bounds. Their appropriation knows no bounds.
And again, it's like this lack of self-awareness to not realize the irony. Anyway, so
back to the plot.
The racist club kind of comes to a close when the priest or whoever he is at the church is like, "Lady, get out of here before I call the cops." And so they all have to leave, and some of the girls decide to keep the party going and decide to go get some wine and hang out. And while getting wine, they run into a woman from Emily's past by the name of Anne. And we come to understand through this kind of back and forth that Anne was raped by Emily's brother. And Anne is not white. Anne is of Asian American or of Asian descent. So a confrontation ensues, largely over her not being white. And Anne's sister stands up to the women and, says some things back while Anne is trying to get her to leave. And the white women are just pissed off and decide to take revenge. They go to vandalize Anne's house, and through a series of ridiculous and unfortunate events, Anne's sister is killed and Anne is murdered. At least we think so. But when they dump her body into the lake, she eventually pops up gasping for breath, and that's where the film ends.
Yeah, and this. So I'll dive in.
Yeah.
Because we haven't talked about this up until now. I don't know who this movie's for, man. It's and I understand that this is the point. It's not only just uncomfortable, it's just an unpleasant hour and a half. And it's one of those things, you read reviews about it too, and you see, oh, you won't believe the last 15 minutes. Well, first, I couldn't see the last 15 minutes. Also, yeah, I believe the last 15 minutes. In the sense, yes, I wouldn't believe the last 15 minutes because I didn't believe anything that was going on the entire time that I was watching this. Look, I get that this extreme depiction of, and it may not be, on a person-to-person basis, it may not be extreme, right? But this extreme depiction of this ugliness and this bigotry, I just don't know who you're preaching to. The converted in the ugliest message that you could possibly preach. right? And look, I get that it should be denounced and all of the. I'm not arguing that these women, but I think what happens, and when I was watching this movie, is that so everything escalates, right? It's just women airing their grievances, and they're ugly and they're bigoted and racist women that are just talking about how small their own lives are and how they deserve, just by the nature of their being, they deserve the fruits of their ancestors, their white ancestors and their white husbands and fathers. And then it escalates into a confrontation. And look, I understand, because they're all together, they have a little bit of bravery amongst themselves. And so the confrontation between 6 or 5 women on against 2 women is something that could potentially happen. So when they go and they vandalize the house, and it escalates into this killing that happens where they put peanut M&Ms in her mouth and she has a peanut allergy and she passes away. And then they essentially have this very, I don't know if you want to consider it graphic or not. I mean, they try to stage the break-in to this woman's house as a rape. They rape her with some sort of foreign object. You don't really see that. I mean, you don't. Obviously, it's not as graphic as you may be imagining in your head when I say it. It is graphic and it is disturbing. Then they bag these 2 women up and they take them out on a boat and drop them into a lake. I just think that escalation of events then shifts the audience's mindset, or at least for me it did, where you're like, okay, now how are they going to get out of this? Where you're kind of not like rooting for these women. It's still horrible, but you're also, then your mind is not back on the horrible thing to see that these women did or are. It's more on the event of, okay, how are they going to hide themselves from this? And then the idea that she pops out and that they're going to have face retribution for their actions. It like, if you take this and you watch something like Get Out, the last scene in Get Out, where you're visibly worried that the cops are coming to a situation where you should want the cops to come. Or if you couple this with something like, American History X, or even, the other wake up call to America movies like Kids, all of those movies are so much better than this. And I just don't know, showing that sort of sensationalism obviously paints it so broad, with such broad strokes, that I don't know who you're talking to. You're not trying to convince someone who works for Stormfront. And again, their actions, look, I understand that people have those thoughts and they may end up saying that stuff within sort of close quarters. Like the lady who worked for Stormfront was also somewhat apologetic for working for Stormfront and not a lot of it rang true. What really rang true for me, a lot of what really rang true, and the stuff that I thought that they did really well, was the first 15 minutes, where you get that spin back on, oh shit, she just told a white kid to go tell off a person of color janitor for no reason whatsoever, for just doing her job. And there was a point in the conversation at the church where they were like, one of the things we need to be doing is belittling black parents in front of their black kids. That's the stuff to me that was really, really powerful and really, really eye-opening. And I just don't think there was nearly enough of that. And I think it was so squashed under all of the ramped up rhetoric and the hyperbole. And again, I know that may not be the case, but it just so much of it that it gets all of the subtle little pins that you really need to be afraid of are squashed under the, oh yeah, well, obviously we hate this person who is doing Nazi salutes out in a church parking lot.
I'm with you with the moments of sensationalism where that detracts from the more nuanced messaging of the film. I mean, because this film, we talk about audience and like, who's this for? I don't know if the filmmaker was even thinking in terms of audience, more in terms of, social commentary, right? This is what this filmmaker kind of sees happening. And we have seen, I think, enough of this on white women being captured on social media, kind of going crazy. I mean, I guess the filmmaker was inspired in part by the black bird watcher in Central Park and the white woman who called the cops on him. And so this idea of, and the character Emily says this in the film, of being soft and quiet, so they don't expect like us. They won't be looking at us. Like, this is great, right? I think this is a really good kind of social commentary. But I do agree with you on the end, this is the wrong word. Well, that's not really the wrong word. I was bored by the ending. I was bored by the moment of extreme violence.
Well, it's so obvious, right? It's so very bad things too. It's just now it's a comedy of errors, and it shouldn't be. Like, right. I would have bought into this, like, had they gone, and there's movies that have done this to varying degrees, but say these women, like, if you pull back and realize these women are in Charlottesville, right? And they're about to go, and one of them, like it, and again, I would never say to sensationalize someone's own, like, realistic death like that, right? But had it have been where one of the women hit somebody in a car with a person, or if they had just shown up to a march, or I just don't know if the home invasion aspect undercuts what again, and like you said, it may not be necessarily a message film, but undercuts the severity of the first 40 minutes or 45 minutes that you've watched, where these women are just being hateful and awful. And to see, again, soft and quiet is not what they ended up being, right? I mean, they ended up. And so I understand that's part of it as well, right? I mean, but to personify it to two women that have a personal connection to them, I think is a mistake. I think watching these women go out into society and act on their bigotry is the much more powerful message.
I agree. I would have rather have seen them enact some of those things they were talking about in the meeting, right? The belittling of parents, or these.
Here's what I would have liked.
They're not microaggressions, but I mean, what I mean is, like, actions that are less than, like, killing someone.
Right. And like I said, I go back to what I mean. I understand making you uncomfortable is part of the point of this.
I was more uncomfortable before the ending. Like, I was more uncomfortable with the conversations that were taking place, because I'm like, Jesus, people actually fucking say this shit, and it's terrible. When we get to the ending where they're where they kill the two women, that, I think, like you said, sort of it devolves into a trope that we've seen how many times before.
Yeah, I think there's almost a lot of what they're saying to me kind of fell a little too much on the nose. I feel like this would have been better served had they have toned down the obviousness of their actions and even of their words, where, like, had they've gone in and not used Aryan had that not been an Aryan meeting, but a meeting to start a Christian fundamentalist white school. It wasn't so much about where these women thought that they were actually doing good, rather than being self-serving. Because I think that's really where the harm, I'm no sociologist, but I just feel like if you look at it from such stark terms, and it's one thing where, like, again, you never get the only reason that these women, and again, I know that this is not necessarily a point of the movie of making them realize the ills of their ways, but the only time that these women ever say, sort of, like, take a look back and fear what they've done is when they've taken it to an extreme. Like, if you couple that with something, or you compare that to American History X, where, and again, whether you like that movie or not, there's a moment in that movie where the African-American principal goes to Derek Vineyard, Edward Norton's character, and it's like, you can hate me all you, and it's not, I'm paraphrasing, but the ultimate is what he's saying is, you can hate me all you want, but at what point is any of this made your life any better? I just think, and again, if you go just to the other extreme of comparing it to something like Kids, which was presented as, America, this shit's going on underneath your nose, whether you like it or not. This is what you know where your kids are. If this had been a, hey, do you know what your white women are doing kind of movie, but it wouldn't, but Kids never ratcheted up to a murder, right? There were definitely scenes, but that would have been more interesting, watching these women, like, interact and just be these subtle little moments of knowing that they were who they were, and trying to dig at the progression of society, and trying to pull back and to try to hurt people because of who they were, is a much more powerful message than, oh, well, okay, we accidentally killed two people of color, and now we're going to go bury them, and we hope we don't get caught.
Yeah, I think I like this movie more than you did, but yeah, that third act doesn't work for me either. And I do think that, the more powerful, and I also think the filmmaker is trying to be over the top. I mean, but also sort of play that down. So it's not like full satire, but it is, I think some of the on the noseness is intentional. The filmmaker actually is a sociologist. Did you know that? She has she has a degree in sociology. But I mean, what I mean is I think she's thinking about these things, right? I think she's thinking a lot about these things. And I think that, I just think, like we both said, that third act is a misstep and sort of takes away from the power or other powerful moments in the story.
It doesn't let the film breathe at all, and a film that desperately needs a breath, because you are bombarded with women who are essentially screaming at each other the entirety of the movie. From 15 minutes in, there's always some sort of conflict. They're always in some sort of agitated state, and it's just women yelling at each other or yelling across rooms. And it is exhausting. It is a very unpleasant film.
That's part of the point too. Right? I mean, that's part of that sort of single take, effect, or feeling like you're in a confined, closed space. And
I will say the single take effect was a really brilliant step of filmmaking. I think that ratcheted up the tension the entire time and kept you on your toes, and also didn't allow the audience to breathe. Again, that third act for me just makes it fall apart. Also, I don't really understand. Like I think this is a movie that's interesting to pick apart. You have the only male character that shows up is another point that I don't know if I'm not sure what the movie fully knows what it wants to do with that character and what it wants to say there, because it's at one point being shown as he's like, these are women that are deferring to their men. But then when push comes to shove, she calls him a cuck. She slaps him. He slaps himself. They don't listen to him. He seems to be the only real racist voice of reason throughout the entire thing.
Yeah. He's still racist, but he has a voice of reason. He's kind of like, what are you doing? Stop. This is stupid. Let's get out of here.
And so, I mean, I think your mileage may vary, on how you feel about this, but for me, it just kind of, I think it kind of pulled the rug out for me. And I'm not going to go back to this, but I'm glad I watched it, but I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if it was all that shocking, really. And I don't really think it's one of those movies that this is a wake up call. I think this is not something that people aren't aware of. I think I think that we see this played out, and we see it. You've seen the Charlottesville shit that went on, and you see it day to day. I mean, it's not like this is not hidden anymore. So I have a question. Yeah. I have a question about audience then. Like, if we're not sure who this film is for, because like you said, she's kind of preaching to the converted. A real life, version of one of these women is not going to sit down and watch this film and go, oh, I recognize myself in that. So what does that, or how does that affect films like this? Like, does there need to be any other audience than just us? And what I mean is people who already agree with those things, because I think this, and again, like this is me being political. Sorry. No.
But I think we're very much in this realm of like, I'm not going to watch one of those Kirk Cameron, like Left Behind films. Right? I'm just not going to. There's going to be other things that I'm not going to watch. I'm not going to read conservative literature. Listeners, if you didn't know by now, I'm a flaming progressive, like liberal, right? I mean, or I guess progressive and liberal don't go together, but anyway, you know what I mean? I'm out there on the left, right? But I'm not going to, and I understand, know the voice of your enemy, but I'm not going to read this shit. I'm not going to watch like racist propaganda. So how do we, I guess in terms of audience, how do we get people then to sort of like view that? I don't mean for you to answer that question.
No.
You know what I mean.
But I go back to something like American History X, which I think also presents these dangerous ideas in very compelling ways. If you go back and watch American History X and you just cut out the first half of I know it goes back and forth, right? It time jumps. But if you take that scene with Edward Norton outside of the convenience store that's owned by, I think, a Korean family now, and he's talking to this group of white, young adults, the message that he's sending is horrifically incorrect, but compelling. It's compelling to a group of disassociated and disaffected youth. And then to show the flip side of that, to then show the detriment and the destruction that his anger, his misplaced anger, had on his family, had on his own life, had on his community. And then to show, again, in that movie shows also the little barbs and the little pinpricks and the subtlety of racism and how it permeated his life and led him to see himself as an other and superior and to seek out this Nazi organization within his own community. I think that, I don't know, maybe I'm being too Pollyanna to think that might actually have changed somebody's mind. And if you are sitting there watching if you are having those tendencies or those thoughts, I can see where if you find yourself compelled by what Derek is saying in one scene, maybe you find yourself compelled by what ends up happening to Derek at the end of that movie. Again, I know it's all hyperbole, right? And it's all fiction and story. For this,
everything
movie,
is. I mean,
right? Sure. But so yes, I get the point. The left, but I think the point of even like the Left Behind stories, right? I mean, if is that they're trying to show in comical, not comical ways. I mean, they end up being comical. They're not even being comical
unintentionally
ways of. Oh shit! You don't get your house right, and you don't believe in Jesus, then you're gonna die in hell when the retribution comes. Right? Again, who's it for? What's the message you're trying to show? If you're just trying to wake us up, if you're just trying to show us that bad shit and racist shit exists, I think we know that. And I don't think showing it in hyper stylized, hyper sensationalized ways does anything other than reinforces a worldview that people like this exist and they are monsters and they should be vilified. We can get into this debate all night long about how you actually deal with racists and how you on an individual basis and on a group scale. For this movie, I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure what it does. I'm not sure what it's trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Again, yeah. I'm with you. I think overall in terms of the film, but I think I'm always going to be curious about how we get the other side to listen and pay attention, because I still think, and not to keep belaboring this point, but I still think there is a large amount of the population here in the United States that doesn't believe that racism is a problem, or they don't believe that they are racist. They wouldn't see what they were doing as racist. They mistake, or they would couch it as a pride in their own history and ethnicity. And then, because we hear this right from people in the South flying the Confederate flag. Oh no, it's just our heritage, our history as slave owning people. Right. and again, like, I mean, and I've heard enough people, younger than you and I, say, well, racism doesn't exist. We elected a black president. And again, this is very basic rhetoric, and this rhetoric has been explored by people smarter than myself. But I still think that that's there. And so, I mean, I think that, yes, a lot of us know racism exists, but I still think there are those people, and too many of them, and some who serve in the House of Representatives, back to that idea, that think that we are post-racist, right? That think that we don't need to teach the negative side of U.S. history, things like slavery, and that. Right. Anyway, well, okay. You know where I'm going.
So then what you do is you take this movie and you make something like White Man's Burden, right? Which
sure.
It's not a good movie necessarily, but it's an interesting one. White Man's Burden is Sidney Poitier and John Travolta. And basically the race.
Harry Belafonte, isn't it?
Oh, is it Harry Belafonte? I thought it was Sidney Poitier. But yeah, I think Sidney Poitier would have probably been too old for that.
Well, because Sidney Poitier was Who's Coming to Dinner, right? Look Who's Coming to Dinner.
Yeah, I apologize. It's been a minute and I didn't look it up. But I remember seeing it.
But that's a really good example, I think. Please keep going.
No, so I think you show what the actual results of this thinking is, right? And it's not that we're going to go and accidentally murder two people of color. Yeah, that happens, right? I mean, I understand, but turn one of them into a cop. I mean, like there's social stories to be told here that she just sensationalized for. Again, a comedy of errors. Now you're just trying to figure out, oh shit, are they going to clean up all the fingerprints? Now this turns into an episode in SVU,
right?
Where I like, oh shit, are these people going to get out of this? How are they going to get out of this sticky situation? Find out next week on fucking Soft and Quiet.
Dum.
Right? And again, I don't want to get the impression that I hated this movie. I'm confounded by it, which I guess is good, right? I mean, anytime you're going to tell me that a movie is the most controversial or most shocking, I'm a sucker, right? I'm gonna my ears are gonna perk up. I'm gonna go, oh, I'll watch that shit. You tell me it's the worst movie ever, I'm probably gonna watch that. This seems like it had something. It wanted to accomplish something. I just don't know what that accomplishment was, because if it's just showing people that there are fucking horrible people out there, again, I think we know that, right? I think that you can see that and again, not to get overly political, but I think you can see that over in the past, even when Obama was elected, this idea of that one, we're either post-racist or that we've re-enabled and we've reinvigorated pockets of society that felt like they were hiding, and now they're not. Okay, show me what happens then. What do you think happens then? It's not home invasion. It's not.
Right.
And if it is, it's on a bigger scale than just they're getting revenge on two people. They're not. And I understand this is a scaled back story, but also, then you couple it with a sexual assault of her brother on those two women. Again, you're making it personal, but you're not showing any sort of like American History X makes it personal, right? American History X, Derek Vineyard's brother gets killed. He ruins his family. His family basically goes into poverty because he's no longer there. He kills a black man in the street. Or kills two black men in the street. He goes to prison. His family is ruined. Like, you don't show any of that, right? You're just showing, oh, well, yeah, these women's lives are going to be ruined. They're going to end up in jail. They're going to end up being charged with hate crimes. They're going to end up being vilified. But all we see is the horrific act and them covering it up. And then you get some sort of mild reprieve as this woman comes up for air. But then even then again, like, you don't even know if that's really a reprieve. And of course, I understand that's part of it as well, is that this woman comes up and tells her story and she may not be believed. There's a soft and quiet too that can be told here that's the repercussions of this film. But I don't think this film quite executed as well as it thinks it did. And I see a lot of people, I read a lot of reviews online about how it was people's top 10, and I can't imagine it being a favorite film of anybody's just because it was so awful to watch. I don't know. It just, like I say, like, oh, this is a wake up call. But I mean, I think those people are the ones who already thought that there were people that are meeting like this. And this has been going on forever. I mean, it's, I get it's a modern day Klan, but I don't think you're surprising anybody by showing that a Aryan women's meeting is going on in a church, or that women are joking around with a swastika, or upset that a Colombian woman gets promoted over them at a job where they've been there at the same time. I don't think you're surprising anybody with that information. Whereas I keep going back to kids, people were surprised that their kids were drinking and drugging and having sex and passing along AIDS and having unprotected sex and doing nothing all day besides,
getting high and skateboarding.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. We are recording this on January 6th. So,
oh yeah. I didn't even think about that.
A couple good movie to talk about when thinking about the insurrection.
But I mean, I think everyone can see it once. I think everyone should see one. I'd like to hear what other takes on it. Not that I didn't enjoy yours, but I mean, I'm just, I would no. It sounded shitty. I think I'm interested to see what she does next. I'm interested to see how the narrative continues to play out. If this is something that to me, this is an easy film, not an easy film to make, but it's from a filmmaking perspective, this would be something. It's technically proficient. The handheld camera is good, but I can see that this is not a. I'm interested to see what comes next, especially since she got picked up by Blumhouse, and to see if he invests in her movies moving forward.
Yeah, I think this is innovative enough in its attempt to tell a story that we are disappointed with the payoff at the end. And I think this is actually, I think your sort of frustration with the movie is actually, in a strange way, praising the film. Because
no, absolutely. No, I mean, I'm much rather be angry about a movie than be bored by it, right? I mean, if it didn't do anything for me, if it didn't have, we've been talking about this for 40 fucking minutes now. So I mean, I know. Right? So I mean, like, there's something to be said about this film. So yeah, no. I agree with you that I definitely think it should be seen. I don't necessarily think everyone's going to love it, and I don't think it's actually going to. I don't know how many minds it's going to change, but the conversation that could be had. I think the conversation about how we change our audience is a good one to have.
I do too. And I think movies like this kind of start that conversation, even if they don't fully get there.
Right.
Okay. Anything else on Soft and Quiet? Because you weren't soft and quiet about that film.
I absolutely was not soft and quiet. No, I think we can move on to Terry Gilliam.
It is worth checking out, though. But yes, let's move on to Terry Gilliam and Brazil.
Do you wake from your finest fantasy only to return to your daily nightmare?
Mr. Wong. Yes.
Is your mother about to look younger than you do? Does the woman of your dreams
I love you. In my dreams, I love you.
still have a few doubts? Then it's time to take a stand. To break out of your dull, humdrum life and into Brazil.
So pleased you could make it.
Brazil Sam is a lower level employee in some sort of big conglomeration. We're in a dystopian future where everyone seems to work for an information society. This is very 1984. There's a big brother that looks over all of us. All of our homes are connected via tubes that are bringing us information. Sam is basically a pencil pusher in this organization who has flights of fancy. He thinks of himself as a angelic warrior fighting for the good of himself and humanity, and he has this ideal of a woman that loves him unconditionally, and so he is kind of middling around in his career, and is basically a daydreamer. His life is full of. He comes from a prominent family. His mother has money. She is constantly getting plastic surgery done to herself in order to make herself more beautiful and to make herself more attractive to younger men. And so, at one point, as we start our story, we meet Sam. We also meet another person in a different organization who is overseeing people who are committing crimes against the corporation. And in his office, there's a bug that's bothering him. He goes up to smack the bug. He does smack the bug. It's on the ceiling and it falls down into his apparatus that's telling him who to arrest or telling the police who to arrest. And it changes the name from Henry Tuttle to Henry Buttle. And then we watch the Gestapo-esque police basically cut through the roof of Henry Buttle's Christmas celebration, take him away, and basically lead him to his death. You don't find that out until later, but they lead him to his death. All throughout this, Sam is kind of at the forefront of this because he figures out that it was a piece of misinformation. His boss, the information comes to him. They find out that they got the wrong guy. They got Buttle instead of Tuttle, and so Sam is given a check to pay off Tuttle's wife. And I'm explaining this, and it's all fucking just nonsense. I don't know why. So at some point, like really, all you need to know is that Sam stumbles upon this information. He goes to correct the mistake. And he finds out that his dream woman is living above the person who's been arrested.
Literally the woman from his dreams.
Right. And he tries to move up within his organization so he can find out more information about her. All the while, the organization is trying to hunt her down because she's causing problems. So at a certain point, then he tries to save her, and that lands him in hot water as well. During all of this, he actually meets the actual Henry Tuttle, who's being pursued, and he's played by Robert De Niro, and he's kind of this Superman-esque type disruptor within the machine that kind of pops in and pops out of his life to kind of goad him into fighting back against the corporation that he's a part of. This all culminates. Sam understands that Jill is in trouble with the corporation. He breaks her out, and they seemingly escape together in order to live happily ever after. The organization turns on Sam, captures him, provides him with a lobotomy, and Sam believes in his head that he and Jill are living happily ever after. That's if you watch the director's cut. There is a happily ever after cut where he actually does get Jill, And then there's a theatrical cut that's an hour and 32 minutes, 10 minutes shorter than the director's cut. This was a movie that when it came out, I think this movie is served more by the lore around its making than it actually is the film itself. This is a movie that I like. This is a movie that I admire. I don't necessarily like this movie. I don't think it's of the Imagination trilogy. I don't think it's funny enough, and I don't think it's. I find it overly dour and dark, and I understand that that's part of it. But to me, this is not, of the three movies that we're going to talk about, this is the least enjoyable, my least favorite of all of them. And there's one funny line to me in this that stands out, and when he's at the dinner party and he's talking to the girl. He's talking to the plastic surgeon, and he's talking about putting how he had clipped her ears and they don't stand out anymore, and he thinks
on my breast.
He's talking about her breast. It's like, and the doctor's like, yeah, she had her ears pinned back, and he's like, what did you think they? He's like, oh, no, I just thought she wore fake ears. I thought she had fake ears. I'm doing the joke, no justice whatsoever. That's the funny part.
It's true. Yeah.
The movie is very visually interesting. I think the movie is too long. I think 2 hours and 22 minutes. It goes on. It indulges itself way too much. This is where Gilliam had the budget to do. This is his blank check movie, right? I mean, we go back to not trying to compare ourselves to blank check because that they do what we do better, but and because they have a bigger audience, and a bigger budget, and then they've just been doing it longer. When we get to 500 episodes,
and they also come from within the industry,
so. Right. So they've got better insight than just two jackanapes mucking around on the internet. But
I went to school. I know things.
This he clearly had a budget for his vision for this. I do think it could have served him to rein it in a bit and tighten this up. I don't think every beat of this story, going back to the plastic surgery over and over and over again, or driving home some of these points. This movie is very loud, and it's very, it's very bombastic, and this, like all of the things that Python had done, and what Gilliam had done up until this point, are kind of ramped up to 11, and I think it distracts a little bit from. I think Price is great. I think Jill, who plays Jill,
Kim Greist.
Yes. I think the two leads are great. But I just find this film kind of a slog to get through at times, and it's, like I said, I think it's just too long. I'm not for one. Had he had more to say, or had the story moved along, but we bounce back and forth so many times, going back to the, you find out this, you go back to the. The organization, and there's danger here, and then there's danger there, and then he's got to distrust her, and the distrust beat happens an hour and a half in, and you still got an hour to go. It's, I don't know, like, you feel it's like weirdly odd, since we go back and forth, and so you go back and forth between him being in a space where he's exuberant and happy, and I don't know. I just feel like it could be. I just feel like when I'm watching it, and when I watched it at the Fort Worth Film Club, and when I watched it again for the podcast, like, I know all the beats, and I'm just like, okay, let's get past this one, because I know that there's no real stakes here. We've got so much time left in this movie that I think it kicks back in when you realize that he is going to be lobotomized. And I think I do think that Gilliam's vision and his version of this movie is the best version that he put out. The ending, anyway. I don't necessarily think it needs to be 142 minutes long.
And I agree that I think it's a bloated film. I think there's too much going on that it's not important.
The plot doesn't sustain it. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you, but the plot doesn't sustain it, right? I mean, like, this is not enough of a movie to have to be that, right? This is a simplistic story. And I know and this is a problem where, and we can talk about this in a minute about Gilliam as a whole, but this is a problem with this, is that you have these visionary directors, right? And there's certain ones of these that really truly need an editor. And I don't think in this point in Gilliam's career, like, he was so contentious. And I've read all the quotes, and like, Gilliam is so like, let the artist do it, and let the artist do what they wants to do, and like, don't get the fucking money men involved and all this stuff. Part of me really truly believes that as well. I do believe that every great novel had a great editor involved in it as well. I mean, like there's people that help out and help cull this story down. And for this story, the Brazil story is a man is in love with this imaginary woman and he finds her and he's trying to break out of this workaday life, this drudgery and to be with her. And he just doesn't know how to do that. That's the story. It's a simplistic story, right? But what we're left with is we're going to go here. We're going to go here. We're going to go here. We're going to show you all of these pieces. Like none of that is really all that necessary. And everything else, I don't know, how this plot moves from piece to piece just starts to get drawn out and overlong. And it I think it bogs itself down.
So Gilliam needed his own version of Gordon Lish. Do you know Raymond Carver's work?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know,
I'm not a huge. I mean, but yeah, I know.
Well, you know, I mean, Carver wrote these short stories, and Gordon Lish was his editor, and Lish cut them down to the bone, so that his edited versions are the Carver we recognize. Later on in Carver's career, when he kind of sobered up, he was so upset with Lish that, you know, he kind of was like, you destroyed my work and this is not what I wanted it to be. But anyway, like Lish's versions, this isn't that controversial, but there is kind of an argument in the literary world about this, or at least there was. Lish's versions are better. Carver was better with Lish as his editor. His longer stories, or the stories that he kind of restored, are not as good. But this goes back to your point that like, yes, sometimes, you know, the artist should, yes, be able to do what they want to do. But also, I don't know that Gilliam could really tell us or show us why he made some of the decisions that he made in this film. Back to your point about the plot kind of jumping everywhere. It's a bunch of non sequiturs. And I understand that comes from his time with Monty Python and it's kind of like bouncing back and forth. But you're right. I mean, this is the middle film of the trilogy of imagination, right? We start with childhood, we move into sort of, for lack of a better term, let's call it middle age or adulthood. And then we end up, you know, in old age. This should be the darkest of the three because frankly, adulthood is the darkest time. I mean, this kind of what between, you know, 30, 50, 60, whatever. Sam is mid 30s, early 40s, mid 40s in this film. This is going to be kind of his darkest time. This is the time where he really needs to engage in that idea of imagination and how that can help him escape this loaded, burdened, bureaucratic world that he lives in. And I think, so this is what some of the things that I think Gilliam gets right is this kind of dystopian cityscape where there's a ton of pollution. So instead of like payphones, you have, you know, things that you can like get oxygen from, a ton of pollution, hyper consumerism, an insane amount of bureaucracy. It's a fascist kind of police state. I think this is good. I think this leads to someone like Price's character who has no motivation to move above where he is. He does not want a promotion. He's been offered a promotion however many times, and he's just like, nope, I'm good. But again, I think that's a good trait, right? That's a good character trait, right, in this film, is that he doesn't have that ambition. And again, he daydreams to get out of these doldrums that he's in. But the rest of the shit around it, it's like, why is it there? What is it doing? I don't even know what De Niro's character is really meant to serve, other than the illusion at the end of the film. Because other than that, he's a renegade heating and air technician, right? Which and terrorist. Okay, this would also like the terrorist, you know, the war with the terrorists that has been going on for 13 years. You know, well, it's just beginner's luck. There are some that I thought that was a funny line, but yeah, so much of this other stuff just doesn't serve the story. I think it just could have been cut out. I don't need De Niro's character there, like at all, because we can see before Sam gets tortured, we see him go into madness, and that's great. I don't need De Niro, right, to come in and say it could have been anything else.
I agree with you. I like the themes here. I like this idea of this feeling of hopelessness. I agree with you that the middle movie needed to be the darkest one. But if you compare it with the other two, there's so much world building with this that doesn't payoff in a sense where, like, if you compare it to the movies, if I'm going to show you what I talk about, recommended if you like all of the stuff that Gilliam really paid attention to in this movie. It feels like Gilliam paid way more attention to the set decoration and the background posters, which I do think add to the aesthetic, and I do think add something to it, but I do think that should have been secondary. I think he could have made his point a little bit more clear when he's making this movie. And so that's what I think. I mean, again, you go back to, as we get to 142 minutes, and I know I keep on bringing that back up. I think he fell in love with every element that he wanted to put on screen and wasn't able to cull it back to just show Jonathan Pryce's character. Because if you look at something like Munchausen, it has a story that jumps around, but it also always is moving forward. And again, you can argue the whole point of the middle ages of your life and whether that does that or not, or whether I think both the bookend movies both have threads. And I think you can see the evolution of him as a storyteller too. And his evolution of a storyteller that's moving out of the shadow of being a Python and a sketch comedy guy, right? Because I know did you end up watching Jabberwocky?
I didn't. Okay. So after you made the comment, I was like, no, I'm good. I don't need to. And I understand enough of what the film was about. I can almost picture that film without having seen it. I can almost understand.
It's an unfunny holy grail, right? I mean, it's right. Of the moment. I know that it's one of those movies where it helps if you're aware of all the British comedy legends that are in it, but it is some of the special effects are really good. The gore is really funny and effective. And the last 15 minutes are really pretty good and kind of subversive. But to that point, man, you've got a lot of shit to crawl through. Right. And
almost like literally, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's ugly and it's hard. The mix is bad. It's hard to it's got that problem that Python films had that you were willing to forgive them of because they were so funny and it didn't really matter. Right. If an explosion is going on or people burst into the door and you can't quite hear the dialogue, well, something's funny is coming up in the next, 30 seconds. Jabberwocky has none of that. It just, to me, it was a total, you're just going through mud the entire time. Yeah. Time Bandits to me is really where he starts to find, that is where he starts to find his own footing in his own voice. And I don't want to skip over, talking about Brazil, but I do think that the history behind the film adds to the allure of the film. This idea of, because ultimately Gilliam is Sam, right? In this case, he's fighting against this Hollywood machine that doesn't want him to live his dreams and put out the vision of himself that he wants to put out. And so I think all of this, the film that's been on the Criterion shelf since the Laserdisc era, and you've heard all these stories about the happy ending and the feel good ending and the theatrical cut and the director's cut, and you got an 18 disc, and it's not that many. I'm being ridiculous, but an 18 disc Laserdisc set, and it's been a staple of the Criterion collection since the Criterion collection was started. And so this idea of Gilliam, and I think he's fed into that. I think he's bought into that story of him as being an auteur that's put upon and, should just be left alone. I think Brazil kind of shows that I admire the film. I admire the themes. I just don't enjoy it that much.
No, and you're not going to get much of an argument from me there. I think it's too long. I think it's bloated. I think that the story could have been pared back, and you could have kept a lot of all of the same visual effects and visual set design. I don't think you needed all of the. I get, here's the thing. Did we even need Sam's mother? I think she's great. I think that Katherine Hellman is fantastic, but I don't really know what she's adding to the story other than she gets him the promotion. You can fix that pretty easily.
Right.
But those are those kind of, segues and non sequiturs. Okay. The plastic surgery gag, sure. Right. That's still a prominent thing, but it's not nearly as interesting as the other things going on. The other things about how we get through this absurd life and absurd society we find ourselves in. And I think that if we, focusing on that, but again, he's sort of just kind of playing free association. It feels like, oh, and now let's do this and let's do this and let's do this. And there's a lot of that I didn't need. Where I think, like you said, with Munchausen, there's much more direct connections with everything that happens. And we're always going back to, Sarah Polley even says, what about the people, we need to help them. And he's like, they're fine. Right. And then we cut back to it. Right. But we're always going back to that. We know we're always going back to that. Everything kind of is connected and seems to have more of a reason than Brazil did. So I think the themes are really good. I think that there's a lot that we can recognize outside of our windows right now, regardless of, working in Hollywood, like, Gilliam is sort of looking at this bureaucracy dragging him down. We all have some other kind of bureaucracy sort of keeping us down that we want to fight against and just don't fucking know how.
Yeah. And the cynicism this film has towards its protagonist too is somewhat bizarre, because you're meant to see Sam as this guy you want to break out. You want to see him as the golden god with the long flowing hair and the wings saving the woman. But really you put him in a nightmare hellscape where he he potentially has severe mental health issues, right? And also a sense of privilege. And like, it's there are things to unpack here, but this movie, it really just doesn't feel like it likes any of its characters. And not even Jill, really. And I'm trying to think of how I feel about Jill and what kind of agency she has.
She's not much of a character in the film.
Yeah.
She's an idealized version of, look, he's put her on a pedestal immediately. Right? We all know how problematic it is when we put people, especially women in relationships, on pedestals. She's going to, and she does because she gets killed, but she's going to fall off that pedestal. She can never live up to sort of Sam's romantic, dreamlike vision of her. And so I think, she's a truck driver. She's kind of like a long haul truck driver. She also may or may not be a terrorist, but also she's always being chased by Sam and then chased by the authorities. And she doesn't really get to make any choice. She ends up where Sam wants her to end up, which is in bed with him. Right. And so I think she's a sketch of a character. And like, I'm not going to go as far as to say that, he's misogynistic in his portrayal of her, but I just don't think she is given much agency, if any at all.
Right. I'm trying to think about all these movies as a whole, where the protagonist, you obviously you can see all of these films as potentially not actually happening, right? They could all be in each protagonist's head. And I think we probably should go back and talk directly about Time Bandits and Baron Muchausen, but kind of putting them all together. I'm just trying to figure out, like, was this truly a trilogy that Gilliam had, or was this something that we go back and retrofit onto? Clearly, there's themes that go across all three films. Or is this really some sort of like, was there method in the madness here of making these three films? And this is exactly what he wanted to get across, or did he make three films and then put together a blanket of, well, this is my imagination trilogy? And
so I think that this is an interesting question. And Gilliam has said, and again, whether this was like a retrofitted comment or not, but Gilliam has said that he thinks in trilogies. And so the films that he did after this, Fear and Loathing, Fisher King and 12 Monkeys were his trilogy of Americana or whatever. Okay, sure. But again, like, did you go back and say that, or is that how it was meant to be? I do think, though, that these three films, whether or not they're meant to be trilogies, are connected. And I think too, because we have childhood, right, in Time Bandits, we have this kind of like working adulthood in Brazil, and then we have old age, in Munchausen, there is that kind of through line between them. Also, I think they're all dealing with, how we use imagination to deal with everything around us, how we acknowledge the absurdity of this world. And I don't mean funny absurdity, but I mean like Camus' absurdism, which is like, we're alive and there's no reason for us to be here. Everything that is going on, none of it really matters. But how do you make meaning? How do you make these things matter to you? This is why we have to imagine Sisyphus as being happy, pushing the boulder up the hill over and over again. That was his purpose. And so I do think there is that kind of connective tissue through all of them. There's also that connective tissue of stories and stories we tell ourselves, and the importance, not to be all Oscar-y, but the importance of stories and sort of how we get through the day or get through life. So even if he didn't intend for them to be a trilogy, I do think there's definitely enough connection there, just kind of in content to group them together.
So if you look at the bookends as entities, the protagonists that are desperately wanting to be believed, right? Where the child in Time Bandits is drug along this adventure, not ever really listened to. And then at the end of it, is set to question, oh shit, now that my parents are gone, what the fuck do I do with my life? And then if you look at Munchausen as a older man looking back on his life and desperately trying to convince people that what he told them was real and what actually happened to him, then where does Brazil fall into that story? Is it the fact that we've spent our middle ages trying to forget what's actually happening to us? Okay, that's fucked up, and now I feel shitty.
Exactly. Look, when we are kids, we are our most probably authentic, genuine selves, because we are willing to kind of try anything. We are willing to say yes. We are curious creatures. We are trying to find things out. We are creative. No one has told us that we shouldn't spend our time painting and drawing and writing poems and making film. We don't have our parents telling us until we're a certain age that you need to put those childish things aside and go get a job as an accountant. Sorry to all the accountants out there, but so we don't have that. We just have kind of this freedom to do things. We are at our most free. And so, yes, by the time we're like, Sam's age in Brazil, we're trying to get that back, right? Some of us, right? Not everyone, because a lot of people will never go back to dancing, will never go back to drawing, will never go back to composing shitty songs, right? Look, you should compose all the songs you want. I'm here for that.
Yeah. Right? If you want to sing out. Do it.
To the point of this, right? To the point of what we're talking about. But so many people leave that behind and never pick it up again. And here, I think, and this is the importance of like Sam's dreams, because while they are dreams and the dream is a metaphor, they are his literal dreams to be a hero and rescue this woman. And he's trying to enact that, right? He's trying to enact that dream in his real world. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's dark and depressing. He's left all of that creativity behind. And by extension, it's what Gilliam's telling us that we have done, right? We have lost this childlike freedom. We have lost this childlike strength and authenticity to do the things we once dreamed about.
So again, just to keep pulling the thread. Then. Yeah. So if Kevin is Sam, so Kevin's the protagonist of Time Bandits, a little boy in Time Bandits, and then Sam becomes Baron Munchausen, then that doesn't work though, right?
I don't think they're the same character. I don't think.
No, I understand, but I'm just trying to follow the thread, right? If you were,
sure, because I don't think Kevin would ever become Sam. And this is what is really interesting about Kevin and Time Bandits is that we open the film right with his parents sitting in front of the TV, and he's reading a book,
right,
about like Greek mythology. He's reading about Agamemnon, right? He's reading about Greek mythology, and he's so enthralled by this book, right? I mean, he is in a world of the mind, while his parents, right, are in a world of things, right? Of consumerism. They're talking about new microwaves, new
keeping up with the Joneses,
appliances, keeping up with the next door neighbors. Right? And so I don't think Kevin would ever become Sam. I think Sam was one of those kids who sat right next to his parents in the plastic covered chairs, watching TV and dreaming about those appliances. Right, where Kevin's dreaming about having adventures.
Right. But I would argue though that the cautionary tale there then is that Kevin could very easily become Sam.
Yes, definitely.
If he's not careful. If he doesn't continue that sense of wonder, and even if he does, because Sam still has that sense of wonder, but it's all now self, and it's all related back to himself and trying to escape his world, that you could play it that way as well, that if there's a danger there, but
sure.
also then but there's a danger there where if Sam continues along that level of fancy, then he will also lose himself in a drudgery where he's not paying attention to the world around him.
Yeah, and I think this makes Brazil more interesting if it is a cautionary tale of someone who once had this level of creativity and freedom and lost it, right? Who fell into this, workaday routine and hasn't been able to get those ideals and that sense of wonder back. I think we'd much rather end up, or at least I would, as Munchausen, as Baron Munchausen.
Fuck yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Munchausen lived a kick-ass life.
Even if it was just in his head.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the thing where, and again, I don't want to give the impression that I don't respect Brazil for the accomplishment that it is. I just don't find it as enjoyable as the other two. I think that where Munchausen ends up is obviously a departure from where Brazil ends. I mean, if Brazil is telling us that we're all drudgeons, right? And that we're all going to be lobotomized, we
already are.
Right. These lobotomized robots that just go through life. And that, a real sense of adventure is lived and revitalizes us in the sense of Munchausen, right? Where he goes back and how he regains his youth is to go back and relive these stories, right? And go back and tell a young person about all the adventures that he had. And, I don't know. To me, the one that I love the most, I love Munchausen the most. I think Eric Idle comes in and helps co-write Munchausen, which makes it much funnier, much more whimsical, much more like Python without being Python. There's so much like the bookends to these to Brazil. I know we can go step back if you want to. How we bounce around and talk about them, but the bookends to the Brazil love their characters so much. So yeah, let's go to Time Bandits. So let's go. I'll summarize Time Bandits. Time Bandits is just about a kid named Kevin who is in this world where he is ignored by all the adults and basically doesn't have any friends in his life at all. He finds out that there's a portal to a portal all throughout time. Basically, they're all anywhere in the universe is in his room. These time bandits, these little people who have stolen a map from the supreme being, and they're thieves, are going and bouncing around time, and they happen to bounce through Kevin's bedroom and take Kevin with them on all these adventures while they're outrunning the supreme being who wants to get his map back and outrunning the actual embodiment of evil who wants to steal the map for his own good. All the while, Kevin is kind of enjoying the adventure as he's going through, see Robin Hood, Napoleon. They get on the Titanic. So they go to Titanic, they hit Napoleon, they hit Robin Hood. So it's very much a Bill and Ted, kind of adventure. And, they face off against God and they face off against
pure evil.
They face off against the devil or evil himself, which evil is so good. It's so much fun how they portray that.
When they're talking, when his minions are asking him questions, asking evil questions, it's so great. I mean, it's sort of recreating that philosophical question of why does evil exist, right? Well, if you're all powerful, why do you exist? Who created you? It's just, he just kills his minions. He's like, shut up, right? But it's such a great kind of, discussion that we have all the time. Well, if God's great, why does evil exist? Anyway, okay.
I also find Time Bandits oddly progressive in the way that it handles its little people protagonists, because they're never played for jokes, they're never played for laughs. They're given, that had to have been a great role for all of them. They're all given emotional arcs, and they're all archetypes, for the most part. I mean, some of them are dumber than others and things like that, but they're all such realized characters. And so we follow Kevin throughout this battle, and he helps out the Time Bandits. And they ultimately come down to a battle with evil, and the Time Bandits, in a very Bill and Ted way, bring in all of these characters from all around time to help defeat evil. And Kevin ends up back home. And after it's all said and done, alas, they didn't clean up all of the evil that they were supposed to clean up, that it exploded. And his parents touch evil and blow up as his house has been caught on fire. So as he comes back to his own time in his own bedroom, you're led to believe that maybe this was all in Kevin's mind because his house is on fire because of some new tool or new toaster that his parents had bought. And he's rescued by Sean Connery, the fireman at this point. And
who also played Agamemnon.
His parents open up the toaster oven. They see a bit of evil in the toaster oven. Kevin clearly tells them not to touch it because it's pure evil. They do anyway, and they explode and disappear. And Sean Connery and the firemen drive off, and Kevin is left in the wreckage of a burnt down house, still as a child, with the rest of his life to figure out. This was another mainstay staple of my childhood as well. I watched this all the time. I don't necessarily know if I really even appreciated it as a kid. I think the first 20 minutes of this movie is kind of a leap of faith. Like, it takes a minute for this to really kick off and get started, and for you to start buying into. But once they get to Robin Hood, it's kind of nonstop, and it's funny, and it's, you know, it's dangerous, and it's, I don't know, there's an actual, you know, weight to all of what's happening. To me, this was like just the quintessential like kids movie for me was Time Bandits. I loved this movie, and I watched it over and over and over again.
Yeah, I don't know when I came to this film. I came to it later. I don't remember seeing it as a kid. And I know that I'm a little younger than you, but not that much younger. I mean, so when I always joke about you being older than me, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. But I don't remember it being on TV. But I guess I would have been like 4 or 5 when it was probably showing up, because it came out in 81, so it'd have been like 3 or 4 years old, and even like 5 or 6 when it was at the video store. And I wasn't gonna watch, you know, that stuff at that age.
But this played on HBO all the time, like when I was 7 or 8.
We didn't have HBO in my house. Fucker.
Sorry. Yeah, I grew up in a very Sam-esque existence where my parents
mom was like, go to the library, go ride your bike. HBO. Right. What are you talking about? You got books. Yeah, but I mean, even watching it now, it's such a romp, and yeah, there is gravitas, and there is, I think, you know, stakes in here, and we even see one of the characters die or get crushed, you know, at the end. Now he comes back, but you can see
characters get turned into dog, characters get turned into pigs. I mean, like there's stakes here that are. And
unlike Bill and Ted, when they bring in these historical figures, those historical figures, the cowboys, the knights, they die. They end up kind of in these like grotesque formations that evil kind of puts them in. So there is stakes, there is gravitas, but there's also, again, the lightness of an adventure film that I think.
And when Kevin and the Time Bandits get split up and he meets Agamemnon. See, I did it. Agamemnon for the first time. Like, that battle scene is scary. Like, he's battling a giant with a boar's head
Minotaur.
on his.
He's a Minotaur.
Minotaur. Okay, so that's right. Yeah, he's actually battling an actual Minotaur. And
well, not an actual one. They don't really exist, Jason. But in the world of films, they do.
What do you mean? I'm pretty sure I've been to. I think they have one at the Fort Worth Zoo.
Well, you're an Argonaut, so sorry.
So yeah. So this is. Again, like, and I hate to sound like an old person, but I don't know if kids' films these days have stakes like this. They have this kind of level of danger to them, or like almost like mild inappropriateness of these films that are kind of whitewashed today and kind of sanitized. This movie is ugly and dirty, and it almost feels like, as a kid when I was watching it, almost felt like something I shouldn't be watching. Right? It felt like it was more of an adult film, that I was getting away with something. I really adore this movie.
This film really, I think, goes back to this idea of kids are more free in themselves, more curious, and are more willing to go on these adventures, more willing to say yes than the adults in the film who are settled down and kind of stuck in their way. And I think it helps that Kevin latches onto these, you know, time bandits, because they are in a way like him, in that they just are looking for money, right, and riches, yes, but also a sense of adventure. I mean, they're just out there like, let's go chop it up, right? Let's go see what happens when we do this.
How this story progresses, and like every time frame where they go to next ramps up the outrageousness of it all. When they end up in the belly of the boat, and that ends up being a hat on a giant that comes across. To me, this is where the overindulgence of Brazil hurts it. This seems like all the indulgences that Gilliam wanted to do and all the things that he wanted to explore and show really add to the adventure of this movie, where I think, from a Brazil standpoint, kind of pulls back from it a little bit.
But this one seems more inventive in a more appropriate manner. I mean, do you think that's because it's sort of being told from a child's perspective, and the child has that bigger imagination? So these are the kind of things that take place. Yeah, I mean, I do too. I think that the overindulgence of imagination matches up here where it doesn't in Brazil. I mean, well, look, first in Brazil, like, who dreams of themselves with that hair and those wings? I don't. That's not how I would picture myself as a hero.
Right. Well, especially coming in that environment, right? I mean, like, that's not. You would envision yourself more as Harry Tuttle than you would Shining Knight that doesn't really exist. Now, of course, all of the things that he again, which leads more towards the mental illness piece, because all the things that he imagines, especially the monsters that he imagines, are all so horrific, right? And the baby face, all of the the kind of machinations of the horrible things that are trying to attack him and he's trying to defeat are just so horrific in his own imagination. Now I lost my thread there, but
but again, the horribleness probably aligns with the horribleness of being an adult. But I hate being an adult.
And to go back to Time Bandits, that's what's fun about that, is that when you get back to Kevin's real life, you see all of the things that he dreamed about, all the toys that he played with, which is why you're led to believe that it's potentially all in Kevin's mind, that he made all of it up, are just aspects of his room, or aspects of the things that that he has inside of his that he plays with, or that he writes about or reads about. And so it's one of those things, once he gets back and you see the firemen break down the wall, you're like, okay, well, maybe this was just all just a kid's flight of fancy, until he has the actual Polaroids that have give him proof of what has transpired. So
it's so much fun, and it's but again, that level of seriousness works as well. I don't know. I enjoyed that much more than I did Brazil, for sure. I think I'm with you where I enjoyed Munchausen probably the most. Because I just think it's probably also the best put together.
I think it's the best realized. I think it builds on each of the prior two films to be the best film. Again, I do think so. He brought in Eric Idle to help write it. And so I think that their collaboration, and I think you can see, obviously Idle's character's got a pretty big role, but I think what Idle brought to the table was just that elevated sense of humor. I don't think if you go and ask any of the Python crew if Gilliam was the funniest guy on the show, he obviously got brought in to do the animation pieces of it, and he was a back end actor, but never like a prominent one. To all of the characters and all of the idiosyncrasies in Munchausen, and of course Neville's just scene chewing, throughout the entire movie, it really, really adds to just, taking, like you said, making it a real step up in his filmmaking process and his ability. I think it really shows a real evolution of film from Brazil. I think his use of cameos is, obviously you kind of hit the jackpot with Robin Williams in a cameo. Whether you love him as a comedian or not, and whether you love he's restrained enough in this movie, but let loose enough as well to bring something really, really funny. And this is probably one of the first times you're actually seeing it in that sort of pre-Aladdin sense of just letting this guy go and do what he does, which up until that point in his movies really had been restrained. He wasn't allowed to do that in Popeye. He wasn't really allowed to do this. He could do it in Mork and Mindy, but that's just a TV show, right? It's not like anybody's taking that seriously. And of course, I know he's a well-respected comedian at this point, but to allow him to just kind of go off, and one of the things I love, because again, watching this as a kid, there's the whole scene where, you've got Williams and his wife and their heads come off and while her head is off, she's making those noises, and Sally's like, why is she making that noises? I'm like, well, their bodies are together and the king is tickling her feet, and then you pull back and he's actually tickling her feet, and it's just such a good gag.
So on a nerdy note, what I really love about Munchausen and how it ties in with the other two films is this idea, one, of when it takes place, which is during the Age of Reason. And so you have Munchausen as this kind of, he says at one point, he says, the world is all logic and reason now. Progress, laws of this and that and the other, no place for imagination play, feelings, a kind of creativity. And this is the thing that I love about this film, is that it's saying like there is no place for this anymore kind of in this world. This is what's important. We are still, right, reckoning with the Enlightenment and the sort of negative effects of the Enlightenment. This is Brock's philosophy corner, by the way. And so we have this character who's like, no, like we need to sort of embrace these feelings, embrace our imagination, embrace play, right? Let's be creative. And he says, I don't know how many times to Sally, played by Sarah Polley, if you believe me, if you can find your way to believe this idea, right, to this child who same age as Kevin, but very different than Kevin, this old man saying, no, look, this is what's important, right? You have to believe, you have to indulge in your imagination, in your feelings. And so that's the biggest thing that I love about this movie, is that everything relies on this willingness to believe these stories, the willingness to sort of really lose yourself within these stories. And, it's something that Brazil doesn't have. And it's something I think that Time Bandits hints at, right, or tries to get to, but this one really fully kind of, I think, gets to that moment.
What this does differently than the other two is that, I mean, yes, it's called The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, but Munchausen's entire goal in this movie is really just to reclaim his friends and to remind them who they were and to help them reclaim that glory. And obviously to tell Sally the story and to have her and to give her a sense of wonder and a sense of imagination. But he goes back and all of them, he doesn't, there's grudges between them, but none of them they're all easily overcome. They're all, and they all fall back. And once they realize who they were or what they were capable of, they all fall back into wanting to rejoin this grand adventure that they had when they were young. And to me, that level of that display of friendship and this team, it's, yes, it's The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, and the poster is him, his head as the head of a hot air balloon, which is funny. It's a spot on image. But all of the other characters, from the strongman to Eric Idle's speedster, to the little person who can hear really well, and the other person is a sure shot. All of those teams together, working together to kind of conquer the world. And then him just trying to find himself and go back and relive all of that is so much fun. And I mean, like, the cameos here all work really well. And of course, I mean, you can't really call Uma Thurman a cameo, I guess, because she wasn't anybody at this point from an actress perspective. I think this had to have been, I don't know if this was the first thing that she'd done, but it was. Had to be early.
She's in it too much to be a cameo, and she plays two different characters.
Sure. Yeah. But that's what's fun about this too, is that, all of the characters that you see throughout the film are also the characters that then pop up in the stories that Munchausen is telling, which again can then be believed as he's filling you full of bullshit, and he's just using what's around him to boost up these stories. Other than I sit back and I watch this movie with a smile on my face. I don't really have much more to say about it, other than this one is my favorite by far. I think Neville is so good in this role, and the humor is played so tightly, and it brings back the level of Python humor, but doesn't go back to sketch comedy humor, in a sense that this may be the best non-Python movie that exists.
Yeah, and like we said earlier, these scenes connect. These themes connect throughout the film. You don't have that. You have a lot of the deadpan humor. And the kind of, making a joke too, without making a joke.
The silliness of it too, right?
Yes.
I mean, just like the pratfalls and the dumb stuff as well is all there.
But that's the thing that I always loved about the Pythons too, is that they would do all of that, but they would do it with a straight face. And how many times do we see the silly humor, the pratfalls, the physical comedy, and it's done with a wink, right? It's done with a sort of self-aware knowingness, right? That kind of irony. These guys just do it straight. And I love the ending of this film, right? Where they walk out of the city gates and no one believes them, and they find out that the story he told them just happened. Right? I mean, the little girl goes, "It wasn't just a story, was it?" And he's like, "No." So this was my favorite out of the three.
But going back to Gilliam as a whole, I do think that this is a guy who's drunk his own Kool-Aid a little bit, in the sense that I think you hear these stories of the auteur versus the system, and I think that he's bought into that story of himself and this legend of himself. I do think that there's a reason that Gilliam has such a hard time getting movies made, and I think you can see it in these movies. I expect you can especially see it in Brazil. And yes, I mean, he's run into a lot of bad luck, obviously with the Don Quixote film, but him butting heads with studio heads, I think some of that is earned. I don't think it's just this guy who's being put upon by the system. I think this is a guy who is a talented and visionary filmmaker, and I also think that he doesn't think he needs to play within in the same sandbox that other filmmakers have to play in.
And there's a way, I think, to do that. Sometimes you're just an asshole. And I would say that Gilliam is probably just an asshole. Not that I met him, but going off the way I have to go off. There's a way to sort of do your own thing within a kind of framework. Framework's not the right term, but there's a way to sort of do your own thing and get away with it within that system where you're still butting heads, but you're doing it in a way that you can still get what you want. I say this like I know. I've never been able to do it. I always end up getting fired. So I've tried. And I just my contract doesn't get renewed. But that's a different story. But I do think that he hasn't made the level of art that he thinks he's made. So I enjoy most of his films, right? I mean, I joke about the Brothers Grimm, but I enjoy the hell out of that movie. I think it's ridiculous, and I think they all know it's ridiculous. But and along with Fisher King and 12 Monkeys. But I don't think that they are as good or as highbrow art as he thinks they are. And because of that, he thinks that he has maybe more right to push than he does.
He has a stellar pedigree. I mean, right. I mean, he comes from possibly the funniest group of people that ever put stuff to film. He is a beloved Criterion. Not that that's necessarily the bellwether that, the marker that maybe we think it is. But I mean, most of his early stuff is in the Criterion catalog, including at least at one point in time, right? Holy Grail was there. Life of Brian was there. Jabberwocky is there. Time Bandits, all three of these films are there. Fear and Loathing, Fisher King. So, I mean, he's well covered there. But yeah, I think I agree with you. I think he is I put him on the level of early Burton type stuff, right? I mean, I think that he has the same sort of vision and aesthetic, not necessarily the same aesthetic, but a definitive aesthetic that Burton has, where, and you can't equate that to now. I mean, obviously Burton's gone off the rails, but when you see a Terry Gilliam film, you pretty much know you're seeing a Gilliam film. I would say some of them, obviously in the later years, maybe not so much, but the early stuff for sure, you're watching Gilliam. But I agree with you. I don't think that he is as unfallible as he thinks he is. The definitive point of why does the Wilhelm scream on Terry Gilliam?
Everyone has been waiting for that. We all know.
Holy shit! When are they going to get to that point on Gilliam? It's been 2 fucking hours. Why are these guys ever?
And now they tell us how they really feel about Terry Gilliam.
For two assholes talking about how long a fucking movie is,
which could be an alternate name of the podcast.
Yes, it's the subtitle.
Now is the time on Why Does the Wilhelm Scream, where we do recommend it if you like.
Yeah, if you like this thing, then you may like these things. I'll let you go first.
My first recommended, if you like, is The City of Lost Children. And I think that's a pretty easy one. So sorry.
No, I agree. They were coupled on the Criterion Channel together.
Okay. As like a double feature?
Yeah, as a double feature. Now, you can't watch Brazil on the Criterion Channel anymore. It's no longer streaming. But you can watch City of Lost Children, which I highly, highly recommend.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Ron Perlman at his most, I don't know, buff?
Yeah.
He's a buff in that. He's young. I mean,
He's a weird looking guy in real life. I've walked next to him at a.
He's a weird looking guy on the screen.
Sure. You just like he's weirdly top heavy, like not like you know what I'm saying, like when you walk past him, because he's not a tall, you always like think that these people were taller than they actually are. He's not a tall guy. And I saw him at a Frightmare one time, you know, a Texas Frightmare weekend, and I ended up walking past him, and he's just really like you think he's gonna fall over because he's just like buff on the top, and it's just a weird.
Did he skip leg day? Are you saying that he skipped leg day?
He might have, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that's my first one, City of Lost Children.
My first recommended, if you like, is it's highly influenced by Brazil, but I'm going to go with Joe versus the Volcano.
Okay.
It's a much more whimsical, happy ending version of Brazil, but it's basically the same film. But it has Meg Ryan in it, and that wins out in my book. Is if it's a good, it has Meg Ryan in a woefully underrated role, like where she plays multiple characters. Should have been nominated for an Oscar because she's so good in those. Tom Hanks twee Tom Hanks. It has a sense of danger. He's kind of playing the same role as Sam. She's kind of playing the same role as Jill, but has a little bit more agency. And then the ending is, again, it's a much shorter film, and it's obviously it's a little bit more whimsical and kind of nonsensical, just like Brazil is. But I like Joe versus the Volcano is one of my favorite Meg Ryan films, and of those two that they do together, I really love that movie.
That's a good shout. That's a good one. My next one is The Trial, 1962. Directed by Orson Welles, starring Anthony Perkins, Jean Moreau, Romy Schneider, and Welles himself. Right? I mean, this is based off the Kafka novel where Joseph K., an unassuming office worker, is arrested and made to stand trial, but no one ever tells him what crime he might have committed or what charges are being brought against him. So again, this kind of absurdist society. There's a great crane shot of the office he works in, and it's just like this warehouse full of desks and people sitting at the desks. It's great. And the way Welles filmed it feels like a stage play. I mean, it's much more of a stage play than it is an actual, piece of cinema. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good
And
choice.
also, here's your historical tidbit. Welles apparently knew that Anthony Perkins was gay, but still in the closet at the time. So he had all of these like beautiful women. I mean, Schneider and Moreau, and I love Jean Moreau, just, sort of throw themselves in different ways, like at him. And he knew that he would be uncomfortable. And that's how he wanted his character to act. So he did that, kind of on purpose without telling Burke.
Nice. My number 2 is Joseph McGrath's The Magic Christian, written by Terry Southern.
I fucking love that movie.
It's
fucking weird.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
Not ready for you.
No.
Still not ready for you.
Had the luxury of seeing it on the big screen with the crowd. So this was one of the programming of the AGFA film series. They programmed The Magic Christian, and it was not overly well received by a lot of people. I've loved it. This is a Peter Sellers and Ringo Starr movie. Peter Sellers was notoriously shitty about Ringo Starr getting screen time and words. But basically the movie is about the world's richest man and the world's poorest man coming together and display and exposing all of the greed of humanity by making people do money games. And it's just Terry Southern at his Terry Southern-est, and it's so like subversive and good, and like there's so many like I love Peter Sellers, but there's so many like lackluster Peter Sellers roles, and like this is just one of the ones that is just so much fun, and there's so much to chew on. It's not the easiest movie in the world to watch, really. There's some really grotesque scenes, but it's a fun movie if you can seek it out.
And there's a Yul Brynner in drag scene.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
Pops out of nowhere. It's great.
And Graham Chapman actually wrote part of it as well. So
which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I had a friend who introduced me to this film. He older guy, and I was working in this camera shop, and we were talking about movies, and he was like, "Have you seen this?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "I got a copy. I'll bring you." Magic Christian is so fucking good.
It's got a who's who cast, like Raquel Welch and Polanski, Christopher Lee, Attenborough, Victor Madden. There's just, everybody's in this, and and Ringo Starr is so much fun in this movie. He's just so silly, and it's so good. It's so good.
He is criminally underrated. My third recommended, if you like, is High Rise, 2015, directed by Ben Wheatley, starring Tom Hiddleston and Sienna Miller. And again, another kind of surreal dystopian society where class struggle becomes a little all too real for people who live in this high-rise apartment block and a kind of, post-apocalyptic breakdown of societal norms. Ben Wheatley is an interesting filmmaker. Some of his films or all of his films are maybe hard to watch at moments, I guess I should say, but I think he's a really interesting
I was going to ask how you feel about him, and his level of fame that he has, because to me, I think maybe it has to do with maybe because he's British and like his films kind of have a British feel to a lot of them at least do. But if you like put him in kind of a surrealist horror block, it's interesting to me that he's not more popular. And I know his films are a little bit, they're hard to get into sometimes. And not all of them, like you said, they're not all of them are easy to watch. But Ben Wheatley is one of those guys who's kind of prolific. He's got a lot of output. And I'm waiting for that one film that to do that would really pop with like the overall populace. And
I'm surprised it wasn't Rebecca.
Yeah, agreed.
And I don't know how good of a film it was. I didn't mind watching it when I was watching it, but it also didn't really feel like a Ben Wheatley film. I think even something like Free Fire feels more like a Ben Wheatley film than Rebecca did. So, but I'm kind of surprised that didn't sort of give him a little more like populist attention.
Yeah, I liked In the Earth. I don't know if you saw In the Earth.
Yeah, I did too.
I didn't like Free Fire for whatever reason. It just didn't hit with me the right way. And I was really, and that was, I think, a lot of my expectation going in. So that's not really fair to the film, but I saw the trailer and was like, oh, this is going to be badass. And it was just like, okay, it wasn't that great. But I liked Sightseers a lot. I like Kill List a lot. And so I like his stuff. It's just, it's interesting to me that he's not quite to that level of fame that you would think a guy like this would be. My third recommended, if you like, is the Hudsucker Proxy. So, the Coen brothers' third film after Raising Arizona, and just kind of has a lot of the same gothic cityscape visuals that Brazil does. It's about a young man who's kind of a corn-fed, middle, Bible belter who comes into the big city to pitch to make his way in the big city and to kind of earn his fortune. And he's not like Sam in the sense he is like Sam in the sense that he has a sense of wonder and sense of whimsy, but he's but also he's not quite as disaffected as Sam is in his pursuit of his dreams. So anyway, the Hudsucker Proxy, a lesser known, although I'm sure people know about it, but a lesser seen, I think, Coen brothers film.
And that was, you see a lot of Raimi's influence and that, I think, especially. And I think he did an early draft of the film, right? He wrote an early draft of the film and then it was reworked.
I think so. I forget all of the history. That was one of the things that was interesting to me watching Jabberwocky, is that it feels like, and again, I know that those two, like Evil Dead and Jabberwocky, would have come out it would have been weird for me if Sam Raimi had seen Jabberwocky, but there's a lot of that it was really evident of the camera movement that's in Python stuff that was in Evil Dead that wasn't evident to me until I watched Jabberwocky and was kind of like this, because Jabberwocky has that Bruce Campbell, I'm stuck on his face while the entire world around him is spinning around. That is evident, highly evident in the first opening scenes and several other scenes in Jabberwocky. It was just an interesting. It was a side note. It was an anecdote that I noted when I was watching that movie.
That's an interesting anecdote, Jason. Thank you for that.
Before we leave, did you see where Olivia Hussey is suing Paramount? I believe Paramount for the nude scenes in Romeo and Juliet.
I did. I'm glad you brought I meant to make a note to bring this up, so I'm glad you brought that up. Olivia Hussey, who we talked about during our Christmas movie episode with Black Christmas. I did, and she and her co-star are both suing, and they were only able to because I believe
the statute of limitation laws got pulled, right?
Right.
In California.
And these are things that I don't really quite understand. But I think good for her. Good for them.
I think you on the surface, you can think, oh, well, why the hell is this, 50 years later or whatever? And Olivia Hussey's 70. Why is she looking? I don't think she's looking for money. I think that she's doing this to lay the groundwork for other young actors and actresses who feel exploited. And I know that it's supposedly better nowadays, with intimacy coordinators and things like that. But I think that this is a suit to set a precedent. And, again, I doubt if she wins, she'll ever see any of the money, and she probably doesn't need it at this point. But I think if she wins, it sends a message to filmmakers making movies with young people and the exploitation that you feel like you could do with them back in 68. So, and again, I honestly don't, I think that she, going back and looking at it, whether they felt like they had any sort of say over it, they think, they felt pressured into doing it. But I was reading like that Romeo and Juliet was shown in classrooms throughout the 70s and 80s with full nudity on, in the videotape, and wasn't like that. It's a weird thing that happened that, and it's so oddly tittillating that doesn't necessarily need to be part of the story. But I just found it interesting that I'm interested to see how the case plays out, and I hope that they win. And
I do too.
And not that, like I said, not that anything that Paramount will have to do anything, but again, allowing people that come after them better situations. So,
and I think it puts filmmakers and studios on notice. I think it set, especially if they win any content at all. I actually think just this coming out now and bringing attention to it puts everyone on notice and says you need to watch out. This is going to happen, right? Like you said, she's doing this to set up precedent for people coming next, because there's still, and we've talked about this with Lindsay Lohan and others. There's still an inordinate amount of exploitation, and there is no expiration date on trauma. So anybody out there saying well, it's been so long, aren't you over it? Fuck that. We don't get over some of these things. We figure out how to kind of, deal with them or manage, but they're still there. They're always there. So there is no end date on trauma. So yeah, good for her. And I hope this does set a precedent kind of going forward.
So what are we talking about next time, Brock?
So next time, Jason, we'll be starting our series on Elaine May, the great overlooked Elaine May. So we're going to take a look at her first two films, A New Leaf and The Heartbreak Kid, starring respectively Walter Matthau and Charles Grodin. We're also going to discuss Darren Aronofsky's latest film, The Whale, which I have some thoughts on. So look forward to that.
And quiet about them is the question we have.
I will try to keep my voice at a level volume, a measured discussion on.
I have not seen it yet, but I will see it between now and then.
Go do that. So what else? Anything else coming up?
So this will post soon. So if you're listening to this and you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we are having a couple of things happen in the third week in January. On January 18th at Stage West Theater, we are doing a showcase of Texas filmmakers and their short films. A few filmmakers out of Austin and a few out of Denton and Fort Worth. We're having a recorded Q&A with the ones out of Austin, and then we'll be an actual Q&A with the filmmakers in person at Stage West after their short films. I've seen most of these, and I will have seen all of them by this time of the screening, and they're good. They're interesting movies. I'm not normally a huge fan of short films. I have a hard time compartmentalizing how I feel about them. If I don't have a full narrative thread and I get little bits and pieces. So that's my own failing, not anybody else's. And I recognize that, but I'll try to have some questions for these filmmakers as they get up on stage at Stage West. But we would really love to see you guys out there. We would really love to have a big crowd and to kind of show them what the Fort Worth Film Club can do and what it's all about. And we want to show some love to these filmmakers and hopefully have them come back. Again, on January 21st, we're going to be having the Real House Foundation's Mystery Movie Minithon 6, $35, Stage West, 2 movies, food, raffles, auctions, food fun, did food twice, and now 3 times.
Company.
good company. Bring your friends. I'm looking for 100 people. I'm not going to get there, but I'm looking for that. So tell your friends, tell your mothers, tell your neighbors, have them all come out and support a great cause. We recently put together a little promo video. It's a little, I will say, amateurish, just because I'm personally involved in it and I have a hard time watching myself do things. But check that out. We did have an event with the kids in the 28th, which is a lot of fun. We showed them The Last Starfighter, and that was a blast. So, but yeah, come help us celebrate film in Fort Worth, and come help us celebrate fostering the next generation of film lovers. And January 21st, 6 p.m. at Stage West. You can find out more at realhousefoundation.org. Outside of that, that's all I got, man.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Keep on screaming.
You have been listening to Why Does the Wilhelm Scream with your hosts, Brock and Jason. If you liked today's episode, do us a favor and rate, review, and subscribe in whatever application you use to consume podcasts these days. You can reach us by visiting whydoesthewilhelmscream.com. If you are in the DFW area, we would love to see you at a Fort Worth Film Club event. You can learn more about those and find a full schedule at fortworthfilmclub.com. And you can learn about my foundation and how we are trying to foster the next generation of film lovers at realhousefoundation.org. That's REEL housefoundation.org. Till next time.